integrating programming languages with web browsers.
Thanks. So why implement a language in a browser? And you know, it sort of runs everywhere. Pretty much every device has a browser, and people don't have to install it, which isn't just the issue of a hassle with no permission or whatever. Everyone can be running the latest version. You can run offline if you just take the files. People are familiar with the interface because they use browsers all the time. I'm almost certain that because of the billions of web pages and the amount of the world that depends upon HTML5 and JavaScript, it'll be kept going for decades and decades. You know, you're running the sandbox, security is not an issue. It runs really fast these days. But that's not what this talks about. Those are just sort of the reasons why building a... So what this talk is about is sort of the new possibilities that browsers offer. So first off, the browsers now have all sorts of things for doing geometric transformations, 2 or 3D graphics, animation. Zooming, by the way, is just a small issue, but it's interesting that you can build an interface and not worry about the scale because somebody can zoom in or zoom out just using usual browser things. Typically these days you get like 50 megabytes of storage within somebody's browser. There's a very nice way in which event handling works. With CSS, there's flexible styling, but I'll show you why that's important soon. And you wouldn't think that drag and drop is a big deal, but I've discovered that it's amazingly a big deal, and it enables so much. And of course, you have the elements inside the browser, the videos or the sounds or whatever, but those are things that can be programmed as well. And then there's things that are coming out in line, which by the way might have influenced even some of the things Corey was talking about, right? There's this WebRTC that enables peer-to-peer communication and so on. And then the browser often has all these ways for disability where you don't have a device or your eyes don't work in certain ways. And again, as a developer, you kind of leave that to the browser to do it. And then there's all these sensors and devices connected that you could access from them. And this last point is a bit esoteric, but it's one I've been arguing with the, or not arguing, but I tried to push this idea to the NetLogo web team quite a long time ago, and they instantly said yes, but we're so busy we didn't get around to it eventually. Which is that you could be using the debuggers that's built into Firefox or Chrome to debug programs that are in any language that translates to JavaScript such that it also produces the maps that the browser knows coming out. So you can do really sophisticated debugging in programming language within the browser. So that's all the things that all the browsers give you. And then there's just millions of things that third parties offer. Cloud storage from Google or Dropbox or whatever. A little distinction between cloud storage and publication is whether, when you store something, whether it can be served as a web page. I'll talk about that in a minute. Google Translate works for over 100 languages, and it used to be terrible, and then it was bad, and it's getting better all the time. You know, most of the social media sites have interfaces. And then there's just so many libraries that are useful. D3 is a very popular one for graphics, for data visualization. I was just looking at this one about Google has, you know, recently with Google Pictures, you can just say, show me all my photos that have sunsets or have a dog in it. But now they have an API that you can just use from calling on your web page and do those kinds of picture recognition things. You know, there's a whole set of game engines. By the way, I said at the beginning here, sorry, maybe I shouldn't go backwards. Is that all these slides with this URL and then and therefore want to know more about these things. This whole question of what should an interface look like, it becomes kind of something that a non-programmer could have complete control over. Anybody that knows enough HTML or CSS can, if the interface is built in a nice modular way, rearrange things, gives only certain subsets for different purposes, for different audiences. So the interface itself can be changed in drastic ways. I haven't done this, but regarding CSS, with the desktop version of ToonTalk, I very much well remember this 15-year-old who said, ToonTalk's really cool, but it looks like a kid's thing, and I'm kind of embarrassed to show it off or something. He said, why don't you make a skin for it that looks cool? And of course, I didn't have the time or resources to do it, but that's the kind of thing that is relatively straightforward to build your system right. And then the other idea is that if you're making a manual or a tutorial, you could just be embedding pieces of your programming language right there in line. So, yeah, so that and then this other idea is that any web page, if you've got a programming language that is integrated well with the web browser, then any element of rich text or video or whatever could have users' programs written into your favorite Constructionist language, giving behaviors to them. They don't have to be such that we push a button in JavaScript ones, we push a button and we snap to a ToonTalk. So that's what I wanted to say about the advantages, and then the rest of the time I wanted to illustrate this with one example. Because I've been working on a web version of ToonTalk for about 2 years. I have time. And I wanted to kind of demonstrate some of these possibilities. So, let's see which one I want to do first. Well, first I'll explain the integration is such that every element in the browser, every DOM element is called, can be given ToonTalk robots that can have behavior. And then any browser event, whether it's coming from a touch sensitive or keyboard, whatever it is, you can be responding to it, you can receive those events. And then in terms of third-party things, it's integrated right now with Google Drive so that your programs, you don't need to ever think about saving them. If you click the default, it is auto-saved. And then because it's Google Drive, you get all of the ways that Google Drive gives you for sharing things. So if you want to share it with the world, you just click and say it's public. If you want to share it with 5 friends, you just list those friends, or you send them the private link, whatever. And then Google Translate is really quite straightforward to integrate in. I just thought, because of where we are, so this is ToonTalk loading with just this little flag saying to translate. And here you've got the usual 100 languages or so. And what's interesting is that anything you do becomes translated. So, and it might take it a few seconds, especially the web's a bit, the network's a bit slow. Usually that's very quick to be translated. I don't know why it's being slow. But even you could even set things up so that if a user's comment is added or some user documentation in the program, it just is automatically translated. So there's advantages to this over only having the translation of the sort of built-in text, because anything built in the system gets translated, and I don't quite know why that usually gets translated. But at least the comment of the help is. So let's go back here. So one thing that really was a pleasant surprise to me was if you do drag and drop the HTML5 way, of course you could drag things within a page, and you could even drag within pages, but all the browsers are set up so that you can drag things between Firefox and Chrome or whatever. But even a lot of different apps do this. And it also provides a way in which you can take any program or piece of your program and just drag it to some program that will enable you then to email it to your friends or share it if you're not relying, say, on the Google Cloud instead. And then drag and drop works the other way too. You can drag in anything from the web. So let me demonstrate a couple of these things. But there is that footnote at the bottom, which is the drag and drop. Many of these features aren't really so good on a touch device because, first off, it's really rare to have more than one app window at the same time and moving between them. It just gets messy. Anyway, so let me switch to demonstrating this. I could keep doing it here without doing the English version. So first, let me show you how you can bring something in. And I meant to have the Constructionism page open. So suppose I really like this piece of graphics, so I can just drag it here and then just drop it into ToonTalk, and now I've got this graphics in this world. And if I move it around, the sensors for the left and right are changing. And if I do something like make a number 100, and I drop it on the left, the picture moves, and I could not just manually do this, but I could have a robot to do something for me. So that's a good screen. Something. Well, tempted to refresh I'll refresh. Great, because the robot's supposed to look like that. So let me start over. By the way, there's some sound effects happening. So the simplest thing might be to maybe make this a little bit higher constantly or something. So just a little bit, and I want maybe 100th. And the robot will just drop this on the height. And then I just say stop training. And then if I run this, we get to sort of watch the program run. The robot will just repeatedly do what I did, which was grab a number 1, edit it to become a 100th, and then take the number and drop it on the height. But what's more interesting is that if I turn it off, if I hide the mechanism, now it's running all by itself. And if I don't know why I talked down there. If I wanted to add this to, well, first off, I could add it to just something like WordPad. And so if I just take this and drop it into WordPad, you get the encoding of it that you could just send to anybody or save it. And then there's this cute thing which Mozilla did, which is a nice little editor where if you type something, this is a demo or something. But it's full HTML or something. But I could take this thing we constructed, and I can just drop it right into this Mozilla program. And I guess it has to load a fair number of files. So again, when I tested this at home, it very quickly showed up and worked. But maybe while I'm waiting, say, one hand I can't. Actually, I'm wondering if it worked. It did work. It's just that somehow with the screen resolutions and all this, But the point is, this is a web page, and actually if I click on it, here is a web page, I could get it to run. But I just constructed it just using some third-party text editor or something. But to make it a little easier for kids, there's a button here that says go to settings, and here's where you can say save to Google Docs or whatever. But I could say, I should have changed this. The quickest thing. I'd already done this with a different program, so I just renamed it my program, and now I say I want to publish it. And I can publish it either as a workspace where you can just work it, or you could have one that embeds whatever it is that you've created in a page that if everything is right, you should be able to just edit once it all loads. And I think for some reason I had the same problem, but it was coming out way over here. But other than that, you know, I could be, first thing, you have the full text in here, and I could be describing it, you know, this gets bigger, whatever I want to say. But the important thing is that this is just an ordinary Google document that I can now send to anybody, and they can see this page with the whatever it was I created, and it's live. Now it's getting taller and taller. Last time. Okay. Oh, so very, very quickly, I wanted to show that how I took these ideas and made a manual that has all sorts of things live in it. Like here, I could pick up a Google and drop it on a one, and then I could do it again. But the text is trying to explain a bit all around that's how you do adding numbers, how you can make numbers look scientific or decimal look whatever. And it's nice too that you can even have little questions. Do you understand why this format is like this? You can get a little description of why the number looks like this, but also if you click on it, you go to Wikipedia or Khan Academy or Wolfram or something to get an explanation. So the idea is that things like tutorials and manuals could have all these embedded elements in it. And I showed you how you share programs can do this. So there's a footnote here, which is that for reasons that I don't really understand, Google's had this feature for 5 or 6 years, and now they say they'll no longer, after August, serve the pages as web pages. They're still there, and you can download them and open them up in your browser, or somebody could, or even I could build a very simple proxy that would just read them from Google Drive and display them as HTTP. But it's this is, at least Dropbox hasn't stopped doing it. So somebody with a Dropbox account, you can do this. And then the last thing I wanted to say was, you need servers if you're going to make a system like this. And I think the answer is not really. That you don't need a server to store things because there's the browser storage, and then for sharing or for going between machines, there's if the user has a Google or a Dropbox or OneDrive or any of those accounts. And then serving the pages, all of this is just coming from GitHub.io. And for all the kind of sharing of things that people create and communicating, it doesn't have to be the same system. That could be, people could be using Google Groups or their social, Facebook, whatever they like to use. That could be the way in which the communities. And then the two things that I kind of miss from not having a server is that if there's any kind of error, it's only if the user sends me an email saying there's an error. And if it was my own server, I could easily do it, but there's ways.